The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the Douglas, Arizona station, throwing Willow Carter against the wooden wall so hard her teeth rattled, and when she finally stumbled out into the blazing August sun of 1878, the driver was already pointing at the empty luggage rack where her bridal trunk should have been. "Gone, miss," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Must have been taken somewhere between Tucson and here. I swear it was there when we stopped for water." Willow felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she owned for her new life had been in that trunk. Her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her smaller frame. The linens she had embroidered through long winter evenings in Pennsylvania. The china tea set that had belonged to her grandmother. The 7 dresses she had sewn herself, each stitch a prayer for happiness in this strange new territory. And most precious of all, the locket containing miniature portraits of her parents, both dead now these 2 years past. "But I need those things," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the dusty street. "My wedding is in 3 days." The driver shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. "I'm real sorry, miss. The company will investigate, but these thieves, they work fast. Could be across the border into Mexico by now, or up in the mountains where nobody can find them." Willow stood alone on the wooden sidewalk as the stagecoach rattled away, her small carpet bag containing only a change of underclothes and her Bible clutched in trembling hands. Around her, Douglas bustled with afternoon activity. Cowboys drove cattle through the main street, their whoops and hollers mixing with the clang from the blacksmith's forge. Women in calico dresses hurried past with baskets. The air smelled of dust and horses, and the peculiar sharp scent of the desert creosote bushes that dotted the landscape. She had come all this way to marry Thomas Whitmore, a banker she had met through correspondence arranged by her late father's business associate. Thomas had seemed kind in his letters, promising her security and respectability. He had sent money for her passage and had written that he looked forward to providing her with a comfortable home. But he had been very particular in his letters about proper appearances and making a good impression on Douglas society. What would he think when she arrived at his door with nothing but the travel-stained dress on her back? Willow forced her feet to move. The address was burned into her memory. 42 Maple Street, the White House with green shutters. Douglas was small enough that she found it within 20 minutes of walking, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step despite its meager contents. The house was indeed white with green shutters, neat and proper, with a small garden protected by a whitewashed fence. She smoothed her hair as best she could and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman in a severe gray dress answered. "Yes?" "I am Willow Carter. I have come to see Mr. Thomas Whitmore." The woman's eyes traveled up and down Willow's dusty, wrinkled traveling dress with obvious disapproval. "Mr. Whitmore is at the bank. I am Mrs. Ashford, his housekeeper. You were expected to arrive looking more presentable." The words stung, but Willow straightened her shoulders. "My trunk was stolen from the stagecoach. Everything I own was in it." Mrs. Ashford's expression did not soften. "How unfortunate. Well, you cannot see Mr. Whitmore looking like that. Go around to the back entrance. I will have someone fetch him." Willow found herself relegated to the kitchen, sitting on a hard wooden chair while Mrs. Ashford sent a boy to the bank. The housekeeper did not offer her water or food, though Willow had not eaten since dawn. Instead, the woman busied herself with preparations for dinner, occasionally casting disapproving glances in Willow's direction. Thomas Whitmore arrived 30 minutes later, and Willow's heart sank the moment he stepped through the kitchen door. He was exactly as he had described himself in his letters, 35 years old, of medium height, with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. But the warmth she had imagined from his words was entirely absent from his pale blue eyes as they assessed her. "Miss Carter." He did not take her hand or smile. "This is most irregular. Mrs. Ashford says your luggage was stolen." "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Everything I brought for our life together. I am devastated, but I hope that we can—" "This is very serious," he interrupted, his thin lips pressing together. "I have invited the most prominent families in Douglas to our wedding reception. The mayor, the president of the Cattlemen's Association, the owners of the copper mine. What will they think when they see my bride dressed in rags?" "I am not in rags, sir. This is simply my traveling dress. With a few days and perhaps a loan, I could purchase fabric and sew." "You do not understand." Thomas removed his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief, not looking at her. My position in this community depends on maintaining certain standards. My late wife, God rest her soul, was the daughter of a prominent Boston family. She brought grace and refinement to my household. When I agreed to this arrangement with you, I was assured that despite your reduced circumstances, you had been raised as a lady and would have the appropriate trousseau. I did have those things, Willow said, her voice shaking now. They were stolen through no fault of my own. Thomas replaced his spectacles and finally met her eyes. What she saw there made her blood run cold. Miss Carter, I must be frank. I cannot marry you under these circumstances. It would be humiliating for both of us. You have no dowry, no clothing, no household goods. You would arrive at our wedding looking like a pauper, and I would be the laughingstock of Douglas. I have a reputation to maintain. The kitchen seemed to spin. But I have nowhere else to go. I used the last of my money for the stagecoach fare. My parents are dead. I have no family. That is unfortunate, but it is not my responsibility. Thomas's voice was as cold as a December wind. I entered into this arrangement in good faith, expecting a proper bride. You have arrived with nothing. The contract, in effect, has been broken. Please, Willow whispered, hating herself for begging but seeing no other choice. I can work. I can be useful. I'm educated. I can keep accounts. I can sew and cook and manage a household. Give me a chance to prove myself. My decision is final. Thomas turned to Mrs. Ashford. Give her $5 for her trouble and show her out. Good day, Miss Carter. He walked out of the kitchen without looking back. Willow sat frozen as Mrs. Ashford counted out $5 silver from a tin on the shelf and placed them on the table with a sniff of disapproval. You had best leave now, the housekeeper said. Mr. Whitmore is a good man who has been taken advantage of. Out the back door, if you please. Willow gathered her carpet bag with numb fingers, picked up the coins, and stepped out into the harsh sunlight of the August afternoon. The back door closed firmly behind her, and she heard the bolt slide into place. She walked without direction, her mind a whirl of panic and disbelief. $5 would last her perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful, but then what? Douglas was too small to offer many opportunities for a woman alone. She could not return to Pennsylvania. She had sold everything to make this journey, burned every bridge in her determination to start fresh in the Arizona territory. Her feet carried her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to desert scrub and the mountains rose in the distance, purple and mysterious in the afternoon heat. She sank down on a rock beside a scraggly mesquite tree and finally let herself cry. Not delicate tears, but great gasping sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her lost parents, for the trunk containing the last tangible pieces of her old life, for the future that had been snatched away, and most of all, for the terrifying uncertainty that stretched before her. Madam, are you hurt? The voice was deep and rough, and Willow's head jerked up. She had not heard anyone approach. Through her tears, she saw a man standing a respectful distance away, holding the reins of a large bay horse loaded with supplies. He was the biggest man she had ever seen, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked the sun. He wore buckskin trousers and a worn cotton shirt that strained across his muscled chest and arms. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, and his face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of beard growth. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark brown and filled with genuine concern. I am not hurt, she managed to say, trying to wipe her face with her hands. I apologize for the display. Nothing to apologize for. A woman does not cry like that unless something is powerful wrong. He glanced around as if checking for danger. Are you in trouble? Someone hurt you? No, yes, Willow took a shaky breath. I am in trouble, but no one has hurt me physically. I should not burden a stranger with my problems. The man studied her for a long moment, and she had the strange sensation of being truly seen. Not judged for her appearance or found wanting, but simply observed with careful attention. Name is Jackson Durant, he finally said. I live up in the Chiricahua Mountains, come down to Douglas every few months for supplies. If you are in trouble in this town, I might be able to help. I know most folks here. Something about his steady presence made the words spill out. Willow found herself telling him everything: the stolen trunk, Thomas Whitmore's rejection, her lack of money or prospects. Jackson listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing progressively darker. "That snake," he said when she finished, and there was steel in his voice. "Begging your pardon for the language, madam, but Thomas Whitmore is no gentleman. He is a cold-hearted miser who cares more for appearances than people. His first wife was miserable, though she hid it well. You are better off without him." "Perhaps," Willow said bitterly, "but being better off does not solve my immediate problem. I am stranded in a town where I know no one, with $5 to my name and nowhere to sleep tonight." Jackson was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking his horse's neck. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Carter, and I want you to know it is made with honorable intentions. I live alone in a cabin about 10 miles from here, up in the foothills. It is isolated but comfortable. I have a spare room. It was my mother's before she passed 3 years ago. You could stay there while you figure out what to do next. No payment required, no strings attached, just a safe place to catch your breath." Willow stared at him. "You would invite a complete stranger into your home?" "I'm a good judge of character, madam, always have been. You are a decent woman who has had bad luck. As for me, I give you my word I will behave with complete respect. I can get references from people in town if you need them. The pastor at the Methodist church knows me. So does the general store owner and the blacksmith." It was insane. She should refuse. A woman did not go off into the mountains with a strange man, no matter how kind he seemed. But what other choice did she have? Sleep in the desert and hope she was not bitten by a rattlesnake or attacked by bandits? Use her $5 for a week at the boarding house and then face the same problem with even less money? "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. Jackson's expression softened. "My mother raised me to believe that when you have the means to help someone, you do it. No other reason needed. But if you prefer, I can escort you to the boarding house in town, and you can decide from there." Willow thought of Mrs. Ashford's cold eyes, of Thomas Whitmore's dismissal, of the hostile stares of the women on the street who had looked at her travel-stained dress with suspicion. Then she looked at Jackson Durant, this massive mountain man with gentle eyes, and made a decision that was either brave or foolish. "I accept your offer, Mr. Durant. Thank you." If Jackson was surprised, he did not show it. "Please, call me Jackson. We should get moving if we want to reach the cabin before dark. Can you ride?" "Not well, but I can manage." "You will ride with me then. Molly here is steady and will not mind the extra weight." He patted the horse's shoulder, then held out a hand to help Willow stand. His hand was enormous, calloused and warm, and when she placed her much smaller hand in it, she felt a strange jolt run through her. Jackson must have felt something too, because his eyes widened slightly before he carefully helped her to her feet. They stopped at the general store where Jackson purchased a few additional items and introduced Willow to the owner, a weathered man named Hal Peterson, who broke into a wide grin when he saw Jackson. "Nicky, Jackson Durant. Been wondering when you would show your ugly face. Got those traps you ordered, and the coffee beans just came in yesterday." Then Hal noticed Willow, and his eyebrows rose. "And who might this be?" "This is Miss Willow Carter," Jackson said easily. "Her trunk was stolen off the stagecoach, and that snake Whitmore turned her out. She will be staying at my place until she gets her bearings." Willow braced herself for disapproval or a knowing leer, but Hal just shook his head in disgust. "That sounds like Whitmore, all right. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Carter. You are in good hands with Jackson. He is the most honorable man in the Arizona Territory, even if he does prefer his own company up in those mountains." They made similar stops at the church where the pastor, a kind elderly man named Reverend Matthews, welcomed Willow warmly and assured her that Jackson was a man of his word. By the time they rode out of Douglas, Willow felt marginally better about her decision. These people clearly trusted Jackson Durant, and that had to count for something. The ride into the mountains was unlike anything Willow had experienced. She sat in front of Jackson on the saddle, acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, one strong arm loosely around her waist to keep her steady. He kept up an easy commentary as they rode, pointing out landmarks and wildlife, clearly trying to put her at ease. "That is Cathedral Rock up ahead. Called that because it looks like church spires from certain angles. And see those tracks? Deer probably came down to the stream to drink this morning. We will follow this same stream most of the way to my cabin." The landscape changed as they climbed, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and oak trees. The air grew slightly cooler and smelled of pine. Birds called from the branches, and once Willow saw a jackrabbit bound across their path. The sun was touching the western peaks when they finally arrived at Jackson's cabin. It was larger than she had expected, built of hewn logs with a covered porch and real glass windows. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and there was a well-tended vegetable garden to one side. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear chickens clucking from somewhere behind the cabin. "You have smoke," Willow said in confusion as Jackson helped her down from the horse. "My neighbor Samuel checks on the place when I am gone. He must have come by this morning and lit the fire so the cabin would not be cold when I returned. Good man, Samuel. Lives about 2 miles that way with his wife and 5 children." Jackson gestured to the south. Inside, the cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. The main room contained a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, a worn sofa, and shelves lined with books. A ladder led to a loft area, and there were 2 doors leading off the main room. "That is my room," Jackson said, pointing to one door. "And this is the room that was my mother's." He opened the second door to reveal a small bedroom with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window overlooking the mountains. Willow stepped inside and felt tears prick her eyes again. It was simple, but clean and welcoming, more inviting than Thomas Whitmore's cold, perfect house had been. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." Jackson stood in the doorway, too large to fit comfortably in the small space. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. I will respect your privacy, and you have my word. I will conduct myself as a gentleman. Now, I expect you are hungry. Let me put Molly up, and then I will fix us some supper." "I can cook," Willow said quickly. "Please, let me help. I need to do something useful." Jackson smiled, and it transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. "I will not say no to that. My cooking is serviceable but not inspired. Let me show you where everything is." They worked together in the small kitchen area, and Willow found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Jackson moved with surprising grace for such a large man, and he kept up a steady stream of conversation that required little response from her. He told her about his life in the mountains, how he trapped and hunted and sold furs, how he had built this cabin with his father before his father died, how his mother had lived here until her death 3 years past. "She would have liked you," he said suddenly as they sat down to eat the simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. "She always said that a person's worth had nothing to do with their possessions and everything to do with their character. She could see right through to people's hearts. She sounds wonderful." She was. Toughest woman I ever knew, and the kindest. My father was a trapper, barely home, and she raised me mostly alone out here. She could shoot a rifle better than most men, doctor any injury or illness, and she never turned away anyone who needed help. Jackson's expression grew distant. "When she got sick, there was nothing I could do. No doctor in Douglas could help. I held her hand while she died, and she told me not to grieve, that she had lived a good life and was ready to meet her maker." "I'm so sorry," Willow said softly. "I lost both my parents 2 years ago to influenza. I understand that kind of loss." They looked at each other across the table, 2 people bonded by grief and circumstance, and Willow felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger, who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than Thomas Whitmore had in months of letters, was looking at her with an expression she could not quite name. "We should both get some rest," Jackson said finally, standing abruptly. "Tomorrow I will take you back to town if you wish, or you can stay here and we can figure out a plan. Whatever you decide, you are safe here." Willow lay awake for a long time that night in the small bedroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pine trees, the distant howl of a coyote. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken, how the disaster of the stolen trunk and Thomas Whitmore's rejection had led her here, to a cabin in the mountains with a man who was nothing like she had expected. Jackson Durant was rough and weathered, a man of few words but deep feelings. His hands were scarred from hard work, his clothes were worn, and he lived a life that would have horrified her mother's Philadelphia friends. But he had kind eyes and a gentle manner, and he had offered her help when everyone else in Douglas had turned away. She finally drifted to sleep, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Willow woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a confused moment, she did not remember where she was, but then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly in her only clean shift and the same travel-worn dress, acutely aware of how limited her wardrobe was, and emerged from the bedroom to find Jackson at the stove. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I hope I did not wake you. I'm used to rising early." "Not at all. What time is it?" "About 6. Coffee?" They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and then Jackson cleared his throat. "I was thinking last night about your situation. I might have a solution if you are willing to hear it." "I'm willing to hear anything that does not involve me sleeping in the desert." Jackson's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough. Here is what I am thinking. My mother's things are still in the dresser in your room. I could not bring myself to get rid of them, but she would have wanted them to be used. She was about your size, maybe a little taller. There are dresses, linens, some jewelry, household goods packed in trunks in the barn. If you wanted them, they are yours." Willow stared at him. "I could not possibly accept such a gift. Those are your mother's things, your memories of her." "My memories of her are in here," Jackson said, tapping his chest. "Not in dresses and linens. She would be happy to know they were helping someone in need. And there is more. I know you need money to get back on your feet. I've been thinking about hiring someone to help around here, tend the garden, preserve food for winter, handle some of the household tasks I neglect. The work would not be easy, but I would pay you fair wages. In 6 months, you would have enough money to go anywhere you wanted and start fresh." It was too generous. Willow opened her mouth to refuse, but Jackson held up a hand. "Before you say no, think about it practically. You need time and money to figure out your next step. I legitimately need help around here. This is not charity, it is a business arrangement. And you would have references from me when you leave, which would help you find a position elsewhere. What would people say about a woman living alone with you? We are far enough from town that people do not pay much attention, and anyone who knows me knows I would never dishonor a woman under my roof. But if you are worried about your reputation, we could post bans and marry. It would be a marriage of convenience, nothing more, and I would give you an annulment or divorce whenever you wanted to leave." Willow felt her face flush. "That seems extreme." "Maybe, but I'm trying to offer you options. You take the time you need and decide what suits you best. No pressure." She looked at this man who was turning her world upside down with his casual generosity. He met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes sincere. "Why are you doing this?" she asked for the second time. "I told you yesterday my mother raised me to help when I could. But there's more to it than that, if I'm being honest." Jackson ran a hand through his long hair, looking uncomfortable. "I've been alone up here for 3 years, and it gets lonely. Oh, I have Samuel and his family nearby, and I go to town regular enough, but it is not the same as having someone to talk to in the evenings. I liked having breakfast with you this morning. I like having someone else in the cabin, so maybe I am being selfish as much as generous." His honesty disarmed her. Willow found herself smiling despite everything. "Very well. I will stay and work for you for 6 months, but I insist on earning my keep properly. I will not be a charity case." "Fair enough. Want to start by looking through my mother's things and seeing what you can use?" The dresser in Willow's room revealed a treasure trove. There were 6 dresses in various fabrics and colors, all well made if somewhat old-fashioned. There were shifts and petticoats, stockings and handkerchiefs. In the bottom drawer, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was a dress of deep blue silk with lace at the collar and cuffs clearly saved for special occasions. In the barn, Jackson showed her 3 trunks containing linens, quilts, dishes, a silver brush and mirror set, and a wooden box full of jewelry. Most of it was simple: a cameo brooch, a string of pearls, a locket, several rings, but all of it was beautiful and clearly well loved. "She would want you to have all of it," Jackson said quietly. "My father gave her these things over the years. She treasured them, but she treasured people more. Use what you want and pack the rest away if it makes you feel better." Willow ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the wooden jewelry box. She must have been an extraordinary woman. She was. You remind me of her a bit, actually. That same strength underneath. She had a hard life but never complained, never lost her kindness. Jackson cleared his throat, looking embarrassed by his own emotion. Anyway, I will leave you to sort through things. I need to check my traps up the mountain. Will you be all right here alone? Of course. Is there anything you would like me to do while you are gone? If you wanted to tackle the garden, that would be helpful. The weeds are getting out of hand, but only if you feel up to it. You have had a rough couple of days. After Jackson left, Willow spent the morning sorting through his mother's belongings. She selected 3 of the simpler dresses that fit her reasonably well and carefully packed the others back in the trunk, including the beautiful blue silk dress. The linens and household goods she left in the barn, but she took the jewelry box and the brush and mirror set to her room. In the afternoon, she tackled the garden with a determination born of needing to do something productive. The work was hard, and her hands were soft from months of relative leisure while preparing for her wedding, but she pushed through, pulling weeds and straightening the rows of vegetables. The physical labor felt good, honest, and real in a way her life in Pennsylvania had not been for a long time. Jackson returned near sunset, carrying 2 rabbits and looking surprised at the transformed garden. You have been working hard. It felt good to be useful. Willow straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. I found some potatoes and carrots that were ready. I thought I could make a stew with those rabbits if you would skin them. They worked together again to prepare the evening meal, falling into an easy rhythm. Jackson skinned and cleaned the rabbits while Willow chopped vegetables and set the stew to simmer. They talked about small things, the weather, the wildlife Jackson had seen, the state of the garden. After dinner, Jackson pulled out a worn checkerboard. Do you play? My father taught me when I was young. They played 3 games, and Willow won 2 of them. Jackson's delighted laugh when she trapped his king filled the cabin with warmth. You are a dangerous opponent, Miss Carter. Please, call me Willow. If we are going to be living under the same roof and working together, formality seems silly. Willow it is, and you already call me Jackson, so we are even. As she lay in bed that night, Willow realized she had barely thought about Thomas Whitmore or her stolen trunk all day. She had been too busy living, working, laughing over a checkerboard with a man who made her feel safe and valued. It was a strange turn of events, but perhaps not a bad one. The days developed a comfortable pattern. Jackson would wake early and handle the animals and heavy outdoor work while Willow prepared breakfast. After the morning meal, he would head out to check traps or hunt while she managed the household tasks, cooking, cleaning, preserving food, tending the garden. In the evenings, they would eat together and then spend time talking, playing checkers, or reading aloud from Jackson's surprising collection of books. Willow learned that despite his rough exterior, Jackson was well-read and thoughtful. His mother had insisted on educating him, and he had a particular love of poetry and history. He would sit on the sofa in the evenings, his large frame dwarfing the furniture, and read to her from Shakespeare or Tennyson in his deep, rough voice. She found herself watching him more than she should, the way his hands, so large and scarred, could turn pages with surprising gentleness, the way his face softened when he talked about his mother or the mountains, the way his eyes would find her across the room as if checking to make sure she was really there. 2 weeks after Willow arrived, Samuel and his wife Mary came to visit with their 5 children in tow. Mary was a plump, cheerful woman with graying hair and a ready smile. She took one look at Willow and swept her into a hug. Jackson told us about your troubles, dear. What a terrible thing to have your trunk stolen and that awful banker turn you away. But I can see Jackson is taking good care of you. He has been very kind, Willow said, meaning it. Mary's sharp eyes moved between Willow and Jackson, and a knowing smile played at her lips. I'm sure he has. Jackson, you old bear. Why did you not tell us you had such a lovely young lady staying with you? We would have come by sooner with some proper welcoming gifts. The children, ranging in age from about 6 to 16, were shy at first but warmed up quickly. They clearly adored Jackson, who let the younger ones climb on him like a friendly mountain while he talked with Samuel about trap placement and fur prices. Before they left, Mary pulled Willow aside. I know the situation seems strange, but Jackson's a good man. Best man I know, actually. His mother was my dearest friend, and she raised him right. You are safe with him. I know, Willow said, and realized it was true. He's been nothing but respectful. Mary said, that knowing smile back again. Just respectful, is it? Well, we will see. Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. After they left, Willow thought about Mary's words. She was growing far too comfortable in this mountain cabin. She looked forward to Jackson's return each day, to their evening conversations, to the way he listened to her as if her words truly mattered. She admired the strength in his arms as he chopped wood, the gentleness in his hands when he helped her hang laundry on the line, the intelligence in his eyes when they discussed books or current events. This was supposed to be temporary, a place to recover and plan her next move. But Willow found herself thinking less and less about leaving, and more about what it would be like to stay. One evening, about a month after her arrival, a thunderstorm rolled in from the south, violent and spectacular. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the cabin walls. Willow tried to hide her fear, but when a particularly loud crash made her jump, Jackson looked up from the book he had been reading. "Storms up here can be fierce. Are you all right?" Just startled. "We did not have storms like this in Pennsylvania." Another crack of thunder, and Willow flinched despite herself. Jackson set down his book and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "My mother used to say that storms were nature's way of cleaning the air, washing away the old to make room for the new. She loved them, would sit on the porch and watch for hours." She sounds fearless. She was, but she would also admit when she was scared. She said there was no shame in fear, only in letting fear stop you from living your life. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. Then Jackson spoke again, his voice quiet. "Can I ask you something, Willow?" "Of course. Do you ever think about staying? Not as an employee, but as—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I am not good at this, not good with words when it matters." Willow's heart began to pound. "Staying as what?" Jackson turned to look at her, and the expression in his dark eyes made her breath catch. "As my wife. For real, not just convenience. I know it is too soon. I know you barely know me, but I have to be honest. I am falling in love with you, Willow. Have been since that first day when you were crying beside the road and still found the courage to get on my horse and ride into the mountains with a stranger. You are brave and kind and smart. And I think about you every moment I am away from this cabin. I think about coming home to you every evening for the rest of my life." Willow could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the wild pounding of her heart and the warmth spreading through her chest. "I do not expect an answer now," Jackson continued, looking down at his hands. "I know I am not the kind of man you plan to marry. I am rough and uneducated in the formal sense. I live in the mountains, far from civilization. I cannot offer you fancy houses or social position, but I can offer you respect and partnership and a love that will never waver. I can offer you a life where you will be valued for who you are, not what you own. And I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "Jackson," Willow whispered, and he finally looked up at her. "You are already worthy. You are the most worthy man I have ever met." "Is that a yes?" "That is a not yet, but I think it might be heading that way." Willow smiled, feeling tears gathering in her eyes. "I care for you too. These past weeks have been some of the happiest of my life, but I'm scared. I barely escaped one bad marriage, and I do not trust my judgment. What if I am wrong about you?" "You're not wrong about me," Jackson said firmly, "but I understand your fear. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin, Willow felt a different kind of electricity in the air. She wanted to close the distance between them, to lean into Jackson's solid warmth, to let herself believe in the possibility of happiness. But caution held her back. "Will you tell me more about your mother?" she asked instead. Jackson smiled, understanding what she needed. "Of course." He talked late into the night, sharing stories of his childhood, of his fierce, loving mother and his distant but kind father. He talked about learning to trap and hunt, about nearly freezing to death one winter when he was 16 and got lost in a blizzard, about the year his mother nursed him through a bout of mountain fever that nearly killed him. Willow shared her own stories in return. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her father's business failures and her mother's slow decline, about the loneliness after they died, and the desperation that had driven her to accept Thomas Whitmore's proposal. "I thought security mattered more than affection," she admitted. "I thought I could learn to love him, or at least respect him. But the truth is, I felt nothing when I read his letters. No excitement, no anticipation. I told myself that was mature and practical, but now I think it was just fear. I was afraid to hope for anything better." "And now?" Jackson asked quietly. "Now I am still afraid," Willow said honestly, "but it is a different kind of fear. I'm afraid of how much I am starting to feel for you. It seems impossible that I could know someone for only a month and feel like I have known them forever." "It does not seem impossible to me. Some things are just right from the beginning." The storm eventually passed, leaving the mountain air clean and cool. When Willow finally retired to her room, she lay awake thinking about Jackson's proposal. Could she really marry him? Could she trust what she was feeling? She thought about Thomas Whitmore, who had judged her worth by her possessions. Then she thought about Jackson, who had seen her at her lowest and offered help without expectation, who laughed at her jokes and valued her opinions, who looked at her as if she was the most important person in the world. Maybe Mary had been right. Maybe the best things did come from unexpected places. The next morning, Willow woke to find Jackson already gone. There was a note on the table in his careful handwriting. "Gone to town for supplies. Back by evening. There's a book of my mother's poetry on the shelf that I think you would enjoy. Jackson." Willow found the book, a slim volume of Emily Dickinson poems with pressed flowers between some of the pages. On the inside cover was an inscription in fading ink, "To my dearest Eleanor, who shows me the beauty in every day. All my love, Thomas." Jackson's mother had been named Eleanor, and his father Thomas. The same name as her failed fiancé, Willow realized with a strange pang. But where Thomas Whitmore had been cold and calculating, Thomas Durant had clearly loved his wife with a deep and abiding affection. She spent the day doing the usual chores and working on a sewing project. She had started new curtains for the cabin windows from fabric she had found in one of Eleanor's trunks. But her mind kept drifting to Jackson's proposal and to her own confused feelings. Jackson returned just before sunset, unloading supplies from Molly's back. Willow came out to help and found him removing a large wrapped bundle with unusual care. "What is that?" "Something for you. Well, sort of for both of us." Jackson looked almost shy as he carried the bundle into the cabin and set it on the table. "I was going to wait, but I am not patient by nature. Open it." Willow unwrapped the bundle to find a beautiful trunk made of polished cedar with brass fittings. It was smaller than the one she had lost, but finely crafted, with her initials WC engraved on a small brass plate on the lid. "Jackson," she breathed, "this is too much." "Open it," he said again. Inside, the trunk was lined with ivory fabric and filled with items carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Willow lifted them out one by one, her vision blurring with tears. There was a set of fine linen sheets, a wool blanket in soft green, a mother-of-pearl hair comb, 3 handkerchiefs with delicate embroidery, a silver locket on a chain, and at the very bottom, wrapped with extra care, her grandmother's tea set. "How?" she whispered. "How did you find this?" "I did not find your grandmother's set," Jackson admitted. "But Hal at the general store had this one in his back room, said it had been there for years and nobody wanted it because it was too fine for most folks in Douglas. The rest of the things belonged to my mother. I know they are not the same as what you lost, but I thought maybe they could help fill the empty places a little." Willow set down the teacup she had been holding and turned to Jackson. He was watching her with an expression of such hope and vulnerability that something inside her finally broke open. "You filled a trunk for me," she said, her voice shaking, "with your mother's things, the things you have been holding on to for 3 years. She would have wanted you to have them, and I wanted to give you something that meant something, not just bought goods. These were loved, Willow, by my mother and by me. Now I want you to love them." "Oh, Jackson." Willow crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his broad chest. She felt his sharp intake of breath, and then his arms came around her, holding her with a tenderness that made her cry harder. "I am sorry," she sobbed. "I'm getting your shirt wet." "I do not care about my shirt." His deep voice rumbled through his chest. "Are you all right? Did I upset you?" I thought you would be happy, but if I made things worse—" "You did not make things worse," Willow interrupted, pulling back enough to look up at him. "You made things better. You have been making things better since the moment I met you, and I am crying because I am happy, because nobody has ever done anything this thoughtful for me, because I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." Jackson's face transformed, his stern features softening into an expression of such joy that Willow felt her heart skip. "Say that again." "Which part?" "The falling in love part." "I am falling in love with you, Jackson Durant." Willow smiled through her tears. "I think I started falling that first day when you stopped to help a crying stranger, and I've been falling harder every day since then. You are nothing like what I thought I wanted, but you are everything I never knew I needed." "Willow," Jackson said, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like the chaste, dry kiss Thomas Whitmore had given her at their engagement. This was warm and deep and full of restrained passion, Jackson's arms tight around her as if he was afraid she might disappear. Willow melded into him, feeling safe and desired and cherished all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. For real, not convenience. Be my wife and my partner and the love of my life." "Yes," Willow whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Jackson let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every animal within a mile and lifted Willow off her feet, spinning her in a circle. She laughed, clutching his shoulders, feeling lighter than she had in years. They rode to town 3 days later to speak with Reverend Matthews about a wedding. The elderly pastor was delighted and not at all surprised. "I told my wife when I met you that you two would end up together," he said with a chuckle. "Jackson has been alone too long, and you needed someone who could see your true worth. God works in mysterious ways." The wedding was planned for 2 weeks hence, time enough for the banns to be read, and for a small celebration to be arranged. Mary took charge of the preparations with evident delight, and Willow found herself embraced by the small community of mountain folk who knew and loved Jackson. "He is like a son to us," Samuel said gruffly when he and Mary came to deliver a handmade quilt as a wedding gift. "We are mighty glad to see him so happy." On the morning of the wedding, Mary arrived early to help Willow prepare. Together they altered the beautiful blue silk dress that had belonged to Jackson's mother, adjusting the hem and taking in the waist until it fit Willow perfectly. "Eleanor would be so pleased," Mary said, wiping her eyes. "She always worried about Jackson being alone after she was gone. This would have made her so happy." Willow fastened the pearl necklace from the cedar trunk around her neck and looked at herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back was transformed from the desperate, dust-covered creature who had arrived in Douglas 6 weeks ago. This woman had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes and hope in her heart. The wedding took place in the small Methodist church with about 30 people in attendance, Samuel and Mary's family, neighbors from the mountains, townspeople who knew Jackson. Willow had no family present, but she did not feel alone. These people had welcomed her with open arms, and she felt surrounded by goodwill and affection. Jackson stood at the front of the church in new black trousers and a white shirt, his long hair tied back, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. When Willow walked down the aisle, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Reverend Matthews led them through the traditional vows, and when Jackson slipped a simple gold band on Willow's finger, his mother's wedding ring, sized to fit her smaller hand, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jackson, you may kiss your bride." Jackson cupped Willow's face in his large hands with infinite gentleness and kissed her sweetly in front of God and the gathered witnesses. When they turned to face the congregation, the look on Jackson's face was one of pure triumph and joy. The reception was held at Samuel and Mary's larger cabin, with food and drink and music from a fiddle player who coaxed lively melodies from his instrument. Jackson danced with Willow, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man, and she laughed as he spun her around the makeshift dance floor. Later, as the sun began to set and the guests started to leave, Mary hugged Willow tightly. "Be happy, dear girl. You both deserve it." Jackson and Willow rode back to their cabin under a sky filled with stars. Jackson kept one arm around Willow's waist, holding her close, and she leaned back against his solid warmth with a feeling of complete contentment. At the cabin, Jackson dismounted and lifted Willow down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he carried her to the door. "Tradition," he said with a grin, and Willow laughed as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming. Jackson set Willow down gently, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then, Willow reached up and untied the leather strip holding back his hair, letting it fall loose around his shoulders. "I prefer it this way," she said softly. "You look like the wild mountain man who rescued me." "I did not rescue you," Jackson said, his voice rough. "You rescued yourself. I just gave you a place to land. Then we rescued each other." What followed was tender and sweet, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Jackson was patient and gentle, letting Willow set the pace, his large hands reverent on her skin. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces fitting perfectly into place. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Jackson's bed, their bed now, and talked late into the night. "I cannot believe I almost married Thomas Whitmore," Willow said, tracing patterns on Jackson's chest. "What a disaster that would have been." "I think about that sometimes," Jackson admitted. "About how if your trunk had not been stolen, if Whitmore had not turned you away, we never would have met. It is a strange thing to be grateful for someone else's cruelty." Maybe Mary was right about unexpected blessings. Everything I thought I wanted turned out to be wrong, and everything I got instead is more than I could have dreamed. Jackson tightened his arms around her. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. I already know I will not." The seasons turned. Autumn brought brilliant gold and red to the mountain trees and a crispness to the air. Jackson taught Willow how to preserve meat for winter, how to smoke fish from the stream, how to read weather signs in the sky. Willow organized the cabin more efficiently, started a small lending library with Jackson's books for neighbors to borrow, and began teaching reading to two of Samuel and Mary's younger children who were struggling. Winter came with heavy snows that sometimes isolated them for days at a time, but Willow did not mind. Those long, quiet days with Jackson were precious. They would sit by the fire, Willow sewing or reading while Jackson worked on carving or repairing traps. In the evenings, they would make love under piles of quilts and then talk until they fell asleep in each other's arms. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new green growth everywhere. And with spring came news that made Willow's heart race with equal parts joy and terror. "I am with child," she told Jackson one evening in May, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Jackson went very still. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. "Truly?" "Truly. Mary confirmed it yesterday. She thinks the baby will come in late November or early December." Jackson crossed the room in 2 strides and swept Willow into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A baby. Our baby. Willow, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are not scared?" "Terrified," he admitted, "but in a good way. I keep thinking about my mother, about how she raised me in these mountains with barely any help. If she could do it, we can do it together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months. Willow's body changed and grew, and Jackson was endlessly fascinated, his large hands gentle on her swelling belly as he felt the baby move. "Hello in there," he would murmur, his lips close to Willow's stomach. "This is your father. I'm looking forward to meeting you." Mary was a constant source of support and information, having delivered most of the babies in the mountain community over the years. She checked on Willow regularly and assured her that everything was progressing normally. "You are healthy and strong," Mary said during one visit in October. "This baby will come when it's ready, and you will do just fine." The first snow fell in late November, and 3 days later, Willow felt the first contractions. Jackson immediately rode to fetch Mary, his face pale with worry, and returned within 2 hours with Mary and one of her daughters in tow. "Jackson, you need to calm down," Mary said firmly as she helped Willow into bed. "You are making your poor wife nervous with all your pacing. Go chop wood or something useful." But when Willow reached for Jackson's hand during a contraction, Mary relented. "All right, you can stay, but you follow my instructions and do not faint on me." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Jackson stayed by Willow's side the entire time, letting her grip his hand hard enough to leave bruises, murmuring encouragement, wiping her face with cool cloths. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, my love." Finally, as the sun set on the second day, Mary announced that it was time to push. Willow bore down with everything she had, Jackson supporting her from behind, and with a final tremendous effort, brought their child into the world. "A boy," Mary announced, holding up the squalling, red-faced infant. "A big, healthy boy." Jackson's eyes filled with tears as Mary cleaned and wrapped the baby, then placed him in Willow's arms. Willow looked down at her son's scrunched-up face and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." "He is perfect," Jackson said hoarsely, touching one tiny hand with a finger. The baby immediately gripped his father's finger with surprising strength, and Jackson let out a choked laugh. "Already strong. That's my boy." They named him Thomas Durant, after both of his grandfathers, and called him Tommy. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue-green eyes, and from the beginning he was loved beyond measure. Jackson was a devoted father, endlessly patient with the baby's cries in the night, happy to walk the floor for hours when Tommy was fussy. Willow would wake sometimes to find her husband sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, Tommy asleep on his broad chest, both of them peaceful and content. "I never thought I could love anyone as much as I love you," Jackson told Willow one night after putting Tommy down in the cradle he had built. "But now my heart is somehow expanded to hold both of you. It is almost frightening how much I love our son." "I know exactly what you mean," Willow said, snuggling into his arms. "I look at him and I cannot imagine life without him, and I cannot imagine going through any of this with anyone but you." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Tommy grew from a baby into a toddler, then a sturdy little boy who adored following his father around the mountain. When Tommy was 3, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor after Jackson's mother. Eleanor had her father's dark eyes and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. 2 years later, another son arrived, named Samuel, after their dear friend who had passed away the previous winter. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and gentle, content to sit with his mother while she sewed or read. The cabin was expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family. Jackson built on 2 additional rooms and a larger porch, and the sounds of children's laughter filled the mountain air. Willow taught all 3 children to read and write, using the books Jackson collected and the slates he purchased on trips to town. Jackson taught them about the mountains, about respecting nature and understanding the land. On warm summer evenings, the family would sit on the porch, and Jackson would tell stories of his childhood or read poetry aloud while Willow worked on mending and the children played quietly nearby. Those moments felt sacred to Willow, filled with the kind of peace she had never imagined possible. Occasionally, when Jackson went to town for supplies, Willow would accompany him, and they would inevitably hear news of Thomas Whitmore. He had married again, a woman from back east who had left him after only a year, scandalized by his coldness. He had never remarried and had grown increasingly bitter and isolated. "I feel sorry for him," Willow said one day after hearing that Thomas had suffered some financial losses. "What a lonely life he must lead." "That was nearly your life," Jackson reminded her, pulling her close. "If your trunk had not been stolen." "Then I am grateful every day for that theft," Willow said firmly, "because it led me to you." When Tommy was 12, he found an old cedar trunk in the barn, dusty and forgotten. "Ma, what is this?" he called out. Willow came to see what he had found and felt her breath catch. It was the trunk Jackson had given her on the night he proposed, filled with his mother's things. She had not opened it in years, having integrated those precious items into her daily life. "That was a gift from your father," Willow said softly. "A long time ago, before we were married, he filled it with things that belonged to your grandmother, Eleanor." "Tell me the story," Tommy demanded. Eleanor and Samuel, hearing the request, came running. "Tell us how you and Pa met." So Willow sat down on a hay bale, her 3 children arranged around her, and told them the story. She told them about the stagecoach and the stolen trunk, about Thomas Whitmore's rejection and her despair. She told them about their father stopping to help a crying stranger, about the ride to the mountain cabin, about the gradual unfolding of love. Pa saved you, Eleanor said with satisfaction. Actually, we saved each other, Willow corrected. I was lost and he was lonely, and together we found something neither of us knew we needed. That is the most romantic story I have ever heard, Eleanor sighed. It is our story, Willow said, running her hand over the smooth cedar lid of the trunk, and it led to the three of you, which makes it the best story of all. That evening, after the children were in bed, Willow showed Jackson the trunk. Tommy found it today. I told them our story. Jackson smiled, that soft expression he reserved only for her. What did they think? Eleanor thought it was romantic. Tommy thought you were a hero. Samuel just listened with those thoughtful eyes of his. I am no hero, Jackson said, pulling her into his arms, just a man who was smart enough to recognize a miracle when she stumbled into my life. We were both lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. This was always meant to be. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Willow with a trip to Douglas. They left the children with Mary's daughter, who now had children of her own, and spent 2 nights at the boarding house in town. Jackson had arranged for a photographer to take their portrait, something they had never done before. Willow wore the blue silk dress that had belonged to Eleanor Durant, carefully preserved all these years. Jackson wore a new suit that made him look distinguished despite his long hair and weathered face. Look at us, Willow said, studying the finished photograph days later. We look happy. We are happy, Jackson corrected. Happiest couple I know. That night, lying in their bed in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created, Willow thought back to that desperate girl crying by the side of the road. She thought about the stolen trunk and the rejected proposal and the mountain man who had offered help without expectation. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked, sensing her wakefulness. About how losing everything turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. About how the worst day of my life led directly to the best days of my life. Jackson gathered her closer. Your trunk was stolen, so I filled a new one for you. But the truth is, you filled my empty life with more love and joy than I ever thought possible. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up happy every morning. I am the one who received the greater gift. I think we are both pretty fortunate, Willow said, tilting her face up for a kiss. Agreed. Now and forever. The children grew and eventually began their own lives. Tommy became a trapper like his father, ranging through the mountains and eventually building his own cabin a few miles away when he married a spirited young woman from Douglas. Eleanor married a school teacher and moved to Tucson, where she taught alongside her husband and raised 4 children. Samuel, true to his thoughtful nature, became a pastor, serving the mountain communities with the same quiet dedication his namesake had shown. Jackson and Willow grew old together in the cabin they had shared for so many years. Jackson's dark hair turned silver, but remained long, and Willow's face gained lines around her eyes from years of laughter. They moved a bit slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. On a clear October evening, when they were both well into their 60s, Jackson and Willow sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the mountains. Their grandchildren were visiting, filling the cabin with noise and energy, but for this moment, they had stolen away for a bit of peace. Do you ever regret it? Jackson asked suddenly. Giving up the possibility of an easier life in town for this mountain existence? Willow looked at him in surprise. Never. Not once. This life. This family. This is everything I could have wanted. Why would you even ask? Sometimes I worry that I did not give you enough, that you deserved more than a rough mountain man and a simple cabin. Willow took his weathered hand in hers. Jackson Durant, you listen to me. You gave me everything that matters. You gave me respect and partnership and a love that has never wavered in 40 years. You gave me 3 beautiful children and a life filled with purpose. You saw me when I was at my lowest, and you valued me when I had nothing. How could I possibly want more than that? Jackson's eyes were suspiciously bright. I love you, Willow. Have from the moment I saw you crying by that road. Will love you until I take my last breath and beyond. And I love you. You are my home. Ooh, Jackson. Always have been, always will be. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge. From inside the cabin came the sounds of their grandchildren being put to bed, Tommy's deep voice reading a story while Eleanor's daughter sang a lullaby. "We did good," Jackson said quietly. "We did very good," Willow agreed. That night, lying in bed with Jackson's arms around her as they had been for 4 decades, Willow thought about the cedar trunk that still sat in their bedroom, now filled with treasures from their life together, baby clothes and children's drawings, letters and photographs, a pressed flower from their wedding day. It had started empty except for Eleanor Durant's belongings, a gesture of generosity from a mountain man trying to help a desperate woman. Now it overflowed with the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had endured every challenge. The stolen trunk all those years ago had contained material goods that could be replaced. But this trunk, the one Jackson had filled for with his mother's treasures and his own love, contained something far more valuable, the story of 2 people who had found each other in the most unexpected way and built something beautiful together. Jackson's breathing had deepened into sleep, but Willow remained awake a bit longer, filled with gratitude for the strange path her life had taken. She thought about the girl she had been, frightened and alone in Douglas, Arizona, certain that her life was over. She thought about the mountain man who had stopped to help, who had seen beyond her circumstances to the person beneath. Most of all, she thought about love, not the convenient, practical arrangement she had sought with Thomas Whitmore, but the deep, abiding love she had found with Jackson. The kind of love that grew stronger with time, that weathered hardships and celebrated joys, that created a legacy extending beyond the 2 people who shared it. In the darkness, Willow smiled and let herself drift toward sleep. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild cried out from a dream and was quickly soothed. The wind whispered through the pine trees outside, and in the bed they had shared for 40 years, Willow and Jackson slept peacefully, 2 hearts beating in perfect rhythm. 2 lives forever intertwined by the stolen trunk that had, in the end, led them home to each other. The years continued to pass gently for Jackson and Willow Durant. Their children and grandchildren visited regularly, bringing life and laughter to the mountain cabin. But even in the quiet times when they were alone, the cabin never felt empty. It was filled with memories and love, with decades of shared experiences that bound them together more tightly than any wedding vows could have done. When Jackson was 72, he fell ill with a fever that would not break. Willow nursed him with the same fierce devotion she had shown throughout their marriage, sitting by his bedside for 3 days and nights, refusing to leave his side. Their children came, worried faces gathering around the bed where the mountain man who had seemed invincible now lay weakened. But Jackson Durant was tough, forged by the mountains that had been his home for over 7 decades. The fever broke on the 4th day, and though he was weak, his eyes were clear when he looked at Willow. "You're stuck with me a while longer," he said, his voice raspy but holding a hint of his old humor. "Thank God," Willow whispered, pressing her lips to his hand. "I'm not ready to let you go yet." "Not ready to leave," Jackson assured her. "We still have more story to tell." And they did. Jackson recovered his strength slowly but surely, and soon he was back to his routines, though moving a bit more carefully than before. He still checked his traps, still chopped wood, still read poetry to Willow in the evenings, but the illness had reminded them both that their time was precious and not to be wasted. They began taking more trips to visit their children, spending weeks at a time with each family. They delighted in their grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom accumulated over a lifetime in the mountains. Tommy's son, named Jackson after his grandfather, showed a particular interest in the old cedar trunk. At 15, he was fascinated by family history and would beg Willow to tell him stories of the old days. "Tell me again about how you met Grandpa," he would ask, and Willow would smile and repeat the story she had told countless times. It never grew old, this story of loss and redemption, of brokenness and healing, of 2 lonely people finding exactly what they needed in each other. One spring day, when Willow was 75 and Jackson 78, they decided to make the journey to Douglas for the first time in several years. The town had grown and modernized in ways that seemed both wondrous and strange to them. There were new buildings, new businesses, even talk of bringing the railroad through. On a whim, Jackson led Willow to the edge of town where he had first found her crying all those decades ago. The mesquite tree was still there, larger now, and the view of the mountains was unchanged. "Right there," Jackson said, pointing. "That is where I saw you, sitting on a rock, crying like your heart was broken." "It was broken," Willow said softly. "Or at least I thought it was. I thought losing that trunk and being rejected by Thomas Whitmore was the end of my world. Instead, it was the beginning." "Instead, it was the beginning," Willow agreed. She leaned against Jackson's still solid frame, his arm coming around her automatically. "Do you know what I remember most clearly about that day?" "What?" "Your eyes. The way you looked at me with such genuine concern, as if my pain actually mattered to you even though you did not know me. Nobody had looked at me that way in so long. It made me brave enough to trust you." "Best decision you ever made," Jackson said with a grin. "Second best," Willow corrected. "The best decision was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." They stood together in the spot where their story had begun, two elderly people whose bodies showed the wear of hard years but whose love remained as fresh and vital as ever. Around them, the desert bloomed with spring wildflowers, and the mountains rose eternal against the brilliant blue sky. "Should we head back?" Jackson asked eventually. "We are staying with Tommy tonight, and you know how worried he gets if we are late." "Just a moment longer," Willow said. "I want to remember this, where it all started." Jackson pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We have a good story, you and I." "The best story," Willow agreed. That night, lying in the guest room at Tommy's house, Willow could not sleep. She listened to Jackson's steady breathing and thought about the long, winding path her life had taken. She thought about her parents, long dead, and wondered if they could see her now. She hoped they could, hoped they knew she had found happiness far beyond what they could have imagined for her. She thought about Thomas Whitmore, who had died alone 5 years earlier, bitter and reclusive to the end. She felt no satisfaction in his sad ending, only a distant pity and a profound gratitude that she had been spared that fate. Most of all, she thought about Jackson, her husband, her partner, her dearest friend, the mountain man with gentle hands and a generous heart, the man who had filled an empty trunk for her, and in doing so, had filled her empty life with more love than she had dreamed possible. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, not entirely sure if she was talking to Jackson, to God, or to the universe itself. "Thank you for the stolen trunk and the closed door and the crying girl by the side of the road. Thank you for bringing us together." Jackson stirred in his sleep, his hand finding hers automatically, and Willow smiled. Some things needed no words, no explanations. Some things simply were, as natural and necessary as breathing. They returned to their mountain cabin and resumed the peaceful rhythm of their days. The seasons continued their eternal cycle: spring, blossoming into summer, summer fading into autumn, autumn giving way to winter's quiet beauty. And through it all, Jackson and Willow remained constants for each other, two people who had built something lasting and true. On a crisp morning in their 53rd year of marriage, Willow woke to find Jackson already up and working at the table. He was writing something, his large hand moving carefully across the paper. "What are you doing?" she asked, coming to peer over his shoulder. "Writing our story," Jackson said, "for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I want them to know how we met, how we built this life. I want them to understand that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead directly to the best things." Willow read over what he had written, her eyes misting. "It is beautiful. It is the truth." Jackson set down his pen and pulled her onto his lap, something he'd been doing for over 5 decades. "And the truth is beautiful." They sat together in the morning sunlight, streaming through the cabin windows, surrounded by the life they had created. The cedar trunk sat in the bedroom, containing treasures from their decades together. The cabin stood solid and warm, expanded and modified over the years, but still fundamentally the same home where they had begun their marriage. "No regrets?" Jackson asked, echoing the question he had posed years earlier. "Not a single one," Willow assured him. "This life, this love, it is everything. It is more than everything." "Good. Because I plan on loving you for at least another 50 years. Willow laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was young. "Then you better take good care of yourself, old man." "Yes, madam." They kissed in the morning light, and it felt exactly the same as it had on their wedding day, and every day since a promise, a commitment, a celebration of the love they had found against all odds. The manuscript Jackson was writing grew over the following months. He worked on it in the evenings, sometimes asking Willow to fill in details he had forgotten, sometimes just writing from his own memories. When it was finally complete, he had the pages bound in Douglas and made copies for each of their children. The story began with a simple sentence. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the Douglas, Arizona station, throwing Willow Carter against the wooden wall so hard her teeth rattled. And it ended with an equally simple truth. Some things are meant to be, and no stolen trunk or closed door can prevent love from finding its way home. Jackson and Willow lived to see the new century turn, celebrated in their mountain cabin surrounded by 4 generations of descendants. They told stories of the old days, when the Arizona territory was wild and untamed, when a woman could lose everything and gain even more, when a mountain man could fill a trunk with his mother's treasures and a stranger's future. When Jackson finally passed at the age of 87, with Willow holding his hand and their children gathered around, his last words were characteristic of the man he had always been. "Thank you for the adventure, my love. Same time next life?" "Same time next life," Willow promised, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. She lived another 3 years, cared for lovingly by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and engaged until nearly the very end. The cedar trunk stayed by her bedside, and she would often run her hands over its smooth surface, remembering the night Jackson had given it to her, remembering the proposal that had changed everything. On a golden October afternoon, surrounded by autumn splendor, Willow drew her last breath with Eleanor holding one hand and Tommy holding the other. Samuel led them in prayer, his voice steady and sure, thanking God for the gift of their mother's long and blessed life. They buried her next to Jackson on a hillside overlooking the mountains they had loved, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire community turned out for the funeral, testament to the lives the Durants had lived and the love they had shared. Young Jackson, now a man of 30 with children of his own, gave the eulogy. He spoke of his grandparents' legendary love story, of the stolen trunk and the filled one, of the mountain man and the desperate woman who had found salvation in each other. They taught us that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered mourners. It is about choosing each other every single day. It is about seeing someone at their worst and deciding they are still everything you need. It is about filling empty places, empty trunks, empty hearts, empty lives with generosity and kindness and unwavering commitment. After the service, the family gathered at the cabin one last time before Tommy and his wife would take it over. The cedar trunk sat in its place of honor, and young Jackson asked if he could open it. Inside were the treasures of a lifetime, the blue silk dress carefully preserved, the pearl necklace, the locket with miniature portraits not of Willow's parents as she had lost in the original stolen trunk, but of Jackson and Willow themselves, taken on their 50th wedding anniversary. There were baby clothes and locks of hair, letters and photographs, pressed flowers and ribbons. And at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, was the manuscript Jackson had written, their story told in his careful hand. Young Jackson lifted it out reverently. "This should be published," he said. "Other people should know this story." And eventually, it was. The story of Jackson and Willow Durant became a small legend in Arizona, passed down through generations. People would point to the spot outside Douglas where they had met and tell their children about the woman whose bridal trunk was stolen and the mountain man who filled a new one with his mother's things. But beyond the legend and the story, there was a deeper truth. Jackson and Willow had proven that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that generosity and kindness could transform lives, that the worst moments could lead directly to the best ones. The cedar trunk remained in the Durant family, passed from generation to generation, a tangible reminder of where they had all come from. And each time a Durant child heard the story of their great-great-grandparents, they learned the same lesson Jackson and Willow had lived every day of their long marriage. That true wealth has nothing to do with material possessions and everything to do with the connections we forge with other people. That a stolen trunk can lead to a filled heart. That sometimes the greatest gifts come, wrapped in the most unexpected packages, like a mountain man with kind eyes, stopping to help a crying stranger on a dusty Arizona road. And that real love, the kind that endures and grows and transforms, is always worth fighting for, always worth choosing, always worth celebrating. From the first moment to the last breath and beyond, into whatever comes next. The end.